Hi, welcome to the Carla Knits Podcast. This is a podcast about knitting and crocheting and all the yarny goodness that I love. I am Carla and I live in Nebraska with my husband Jeff and my daughter Jenna and our cat Reese's. This is episode 4, so thank you so much for joining me this week, and let's get started. So first off, what I am wearing, this is the Chauncey sweater by Isabel Kramer. I knit this in 2019, and I looked back on my Ravelry page. I kind of wondered how long it took me to knit this. This is a fingering weight sweater, so that's pretty tiny yarn. So it took me from February of 2019 to June of 2019 to knit this. So I guess I thought it took longer, but that's not so bad in the grand scheme of things for a pullover that's in fingering weight. So the Chauncey sweater by Isabel Kramer. The yarn I used, the main color gray, is by Noble Character Crafts in the iron colorway. And unfortunately, she is no longer dyeing. And the contrasting color here in the color work is by Lemonade Shop, and the color is called Sugar Coated. I absolutely love this sweater. When I put this on this morning, I'm like, oh, I love this sweater. I love how this feels. This is one of my very first color work projects, and the minute I saw the sweater and the pattern, I knew I wanted to knit it so bad. And I was very intimidated to try a color work sweater and fingering weight, but I just went for it, and I am so happy with how it turned out. So this is probably one of my most proudest things that I have knit. I am proud that I was able to knit this and persevere and get through the color work charts and get through all of the stitches with a fingering weight sweater. So that's the Chauncey sweater, what I am wearing. A couple of people have mentioned in my background here, this quilt that I have on the quilt rack. This is Grandmother's Flower Garden. That is the pattern for this quilt. It is a vintage quilt. This quilt belonged to my husband's great-grandma. She is the one who made it. Her name, I kind of wanted to get the history because I do love history, and I love old quilts too. So I kind of wanted to get the history for certain in my head again. So Laura Landvermeyer is the one who made this quilt, and she was born in 1893. We are not exactly sure when she made this quilt, but she passed this quilt along to her daughter, Helen, who was my husband's grandma. And he remembers this quilt on his grandma and grandpa's bed, you know, all while he was growing up. So he has memories of going to his grandparents' house, and that quilt was on their bed. Then it was passed along to his mom, and now it has been passed along to us. So we are so happy to have this vintage treasure. And I know there's a lot of people who love quilts out there. So thank you for commenting on it. That just made us think about some family history that was really special. So that is our Grandmother's Flower Garden quilt. Let's see, let's move on. I don't have any finished objects this week, but I do have a number of works in progress. So we'll get started with works in progress. And I am going to start first with the one that got the least amount of projects, or the least amount of work done on it. This is in my Freckled Whimsy bag, the sweet little Valentine bag I showed last week. This is my DK weight sock. The yarn is by Bumblebee Acres Farm, and it is in their Pride and Prejudice collection, and it's the Miss Jane Bennett colorway. if you remember, if you've joined me before, you know I have one sock completed, and just partway through the cuff is where I was last week. So I am working on the leg. I think I have about 10 more rows before I will start the heel. So I really would like to probably get this done within the next week or so, just because it does go pretty quickly. There were just some other projects that were kind of pulling my attention this week. But the pattern I'm using is also by Bumblebee Acres Farm, and it is their Sock a Day pattern, which I would recommend. It's very easy to follow, and it comes with 3 different patterns in there, and it's been lots of fun. So that is my first work in progress. My second work in progress is also a sock, and this is being housed in a bag that I actually made. And I do not consider myself a sewer. My sewing machine and I don't always get along, and I do have trouble sometimes reading patterns and understanding patterns, but I'm pretty proud of this bag. So this is a cotton, I believe a cotton and steel print with the spools on there, and I love, they have different sayings on there. Some say cut and sew. One actually says cotton and steel, sew with love. But the one that I love the best says tightly wound. And I consider myself at times, sometimes tightly wound. And so knitting and crafting is a good stress reliever. Just changes my mood, makes me happy. But this is my bag that I made, and it's a zipper bag too, which is pretty cool. And inside is just this fun pink polka dot lining. But in this bag is a sock that I started this week, so you have not seen this in progress. This is yarn I talked about last week. My cake's a little messy. This is yarn that I received this month from It's Knitterly Things, and this is a club colorway. By now probably everybody has received it, so I think I'm okay in showing this. The colorway is called Hibernate. I'm just checking my show notes here. Yes, Hibernate. And this is really fun self-striping yarn. I really love it. It started with this kind of golden brown on the cuff into a cream, and then this gray, which has a lot of it's a tonal gray, but it has some variation in there. And then a speckly kind of peachy light tan, and then a beautiful kind of soft aqua blue. And this is how it is knitting up so far. I am knitting it on Magic Loop, and I am using a US size 1. I had a good question in my comment section last week. I had mentioned with this yarn that I was really curious to try this yarn. I had heard about Knitterly Things yarn from a couple other knitting podcasters who said it was different than any other fingering yarn that they had worked with before. So I just really wanted to try it. It is a fingering weight yarn. It is a 75-25 blend, which means it's a 75% superwash wool, 25% nylon. It is just, it's a little bit plumper than some fingering yarns. There are many different kinds of fingering weight yarns, and some are thinner and some are a little bit plumper. And my friend Joanne just asked if I had swatched for this. And the answer is no, I did not swatch. Last week I had talked about swatching for my sweater and how it was important to me to swatch. So did I swatch for this sock, you know, being a little bit different fingering weight yarn that I wasn't accustomed to? No, I do not swatch for my socks. And some of you might be thinking, well, maybe you should. Then maybe you wouldn't have made that big, giant Christmas clown sock for your husband. And that's probably true. But back then, I was so new to knitting that I really didn't know a lot about gauge. Yeah, your gauge or swatching. So I did not. So I typically make, because I've made a number of socks now, I typically do know that I can get away without swatching. I always use a US 1 for my cuff. Always a US 1 for my cuff. When it comes to the body of the sock, if it is a thinner weight yarn, I actually go up to a US 1.5. Just because I am a tight knitter, and when I'm just knitting stockinette in the round, it's pretty tight. And if I have a really thin yarn, I need to have a bigger gauge. So I will go up to a US 1.5. With this being a slightly thicker fingering weight yarn, I am keeping at a US 1. And I am happy with how it is knitting up. There is plenty of stretch to it. I can get it on my leg. I can get it on my over my heel. When I get down to my heel, I may add some extra length to my heel flap. Again, I will probably try it on again. And with Magic Loop, it's really easy to try on because I can just kind of move my needles around, and I can get this over my foot, and I'm not gonna lose my needles. So I will try it on and kind of gauge the heel flap to see if I would like to add a little bit more length to the heel flap. And that is one way you can help your socks too. If you have knit socks and they feel kind of tight getting over the heel, you can always add more length to that heel flap. And there are patterns out there for, I believe the Knitting Expat has a sock pattern, or maybe it's included in all of her sock patterns, for a German short row heel and an adjustment to give yourself some more room when it comes to the heel and your instep. So no, Joanne, I did not gauge, I did not swatch, and I'm hoping that this turns out fine, and I'm pretty sure it will. Having said that, I did have a pair of socks last year that I was knitting on, and I was really excited to knit on this pair of socks. Actually, I'm gonna get them. I'm gonna pause this. So this pair of socks that I made last year, I was really excited to use the yarn. The yarn had been in my stash for a while. Really bright and colorful. Here is what it looks like, but I'm going to talk about this first. So when I started with this yarn, I decided I was going to do a patterned sock. And you know, this definitely has enough interest, and there's a lot going on, but I wanted to try a patterned sock. And it's a pretty popular pattern. I'm not going to say what it is that people were using with self-striping yarn. And so I started knitting along. I cast on my cuff on a US 1, knit the whole sock on a US 1 with, you know, with the pattern, and the pattern kind of pulled in, or made the sock pull in a little bit. But I knit the whole sock. First sock, I'm like, oh, I love this. This is great. I knit the second sock past the heel. And then I got this little feeling of doubt in my mind. These might be too tight. And so I grabbed the first sock, and normally when I finish a sock, I'm going to try it on. I try it on to make sure that it fits well. Well, apparently I did not even think about that with the first sock. And so I went to put on the first sock, and I could not get it over my heel. The patterning on the leg of the sock just had cinched the material in so much that I could not get it over my heel, so way too small. So I had knit one full sock, and the other sock, second sock, was past the heel. before it dawned on me that something might not be right. So there were some tears about that because it takes me a while to knit socks. Yeah, it takes me a while. So I frogged that project. I was talking with my husband this morning. He's like, what's frogging a project? So frogging a project is taking it apart. You're simply ripping the yarn apart. And so rip it for a frog. Yeah. So I took that yarn, I took the sock all apart, I took the second sock all apart, and I put that yarn away for a while. That yarn had to be in timeout. It had to be in timeout because I was so frustrated. But eventually I got back to that yarn because I didn't want that yarn or that sock, or I didn't want that yarn to beat me and not become a sock because I really did like the yarn. So I decided I am just going to cast on a vanilla sock, which is a plain stockinette sock. So here is that finished pair of socks. The cuff is done on a US 1. The rest of the sock is done on a US 1.5. This is Desert Vista Dye Works, their sock yarn. And that tends to be a thinner sock yarn. So I have learned now that I have learned that I should go up to the US 1.5 when I do the leg of the sock. You might say, well, couldn't you increase your stitch count? Yeah, I typically do a 64 stitch count for my socks. I could probably go up to a 72, but that's more stitches to stitch, more stitches to knit. So I'm sticking with the 64. I just increase my needle size on the leg of the sock, and that works. This colorway is really fun. I'm just looking down to remember what it is called. It's Little Shop of Zombies. So I guess kind of a play on Little Shop of Horrors, but Little Shop of Zombies. And it's a bright, colorful pair of socks, and it's a lot of fun. And enough time has gone by now that I think I'm okay, that it was a mistake, but now it's a beautiful pair of socks. So back to this pair, I feel pretty confident that this will fit. When it gets down to the heel, I will try it on, but I'm already stretching it right now, and it has plenty of stretch. So I plan to knit this to about 6 inches from cuff for the leg of the sock, and then I will add the heel. So I don't think I'm probably too far off from knitting the heel on this sock. All right, so that is work in progress number 2. Number 3, I didn't show last week, but if you joined me on one of the earlier episodes, you have seen this. This is my Knitwords sweater. Let me just adjust here. This is my Knitwords sweater by Corey Eichelberger, iRock Knits. And if you can see the little progress keeper on there, that is where I was the last time I showed it, which was a couple weeks ago. So I measured this morning. It's about 4.5 inches. And gosh, I feel like I've been knitting on this a while, and it should be much longer than 4.5 inches. But 4.5 inches is still good for the body of a sweater. So I also measured from the underarm. And from the underarm to where I am right now is 9 inches, or maybe just a little bit over 9 inches. So I need to knit the body 17 inches from the underarm. So I've got 8 inches to go, and then I will put on the ribbing for the sweater. And I had mentioned that I had hoped to have the body of the sweater done by the end of this month. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But I was thinking this morning, when I picked this back up in January, I was not quite done with the color work part of the sweater. And so to have knit all of that, you know, while doing other projects too, that's pretty good progress. So the yarn I am using is Brown Sheep Nature Spun Sport, and all of the colors are listed on my Ravelry page. I still am really enjoying this. I have projects, you know, my works in progress have different weights of yarn. So I have fingering weight for one pair of socks, DK weight for another pair of socks, sport weight. So just very enjoyable switching between the different projects and the different weights of yarn. So that is the progress. I hope to make more. I guess this was just done a couple evenings over a couple of weeks. So maybe 2 evenings a couple weeks ago and 2 evenings this past week. So it's coming along. It will get done. It will get done. Let's see, that was living in my bag, Bags by Awesome Granny, in this fun London print. And it's a great sweater size bag. All right, my next work in progress is also a sweater. So I was able to start my Felix pullover. Last week I had showed the swatches that I had made, and so I determined, you know, the correct needle size for me. And so I started the Felix pullover. I was really excited. It was Saturday night, and it was about 9 o'clock on Saturday night. And I thought, oh, should I cast on that sweater, or should I, you know, just work on the socks? You know, something that I can just go mindless. I'm like, oh, I really want to cast on the sweater. So I'm like, okay. So I cast on my Felix sweater, and I will show you my progress right now. So the Felix pullover is a pattern by Amy Christoffers. This is living in my bag. This is Ginger Root Bags on Etsy. Also a great sweater size bag. I love this bag. This is my progress so far. I don't know how well you can see all of this. The yarn is Queensland Kathmandu Chunky, and it's in a raspberry color. And you can see that's a much thicker yarn. It's considered bulky weight as opposed to the fingering weight yarn for socks. And I hope you can kind of see the raglan detail on the shoulder seams. Let's see, maybe that's the front. All right, so let me tell you what happened in my excitement to cast on this sweater. So I told you Saturday night, 9 o'clock or so, I decided I'm gonna cast on this sweater. So I started, I got the ribbing for the neckline done, awesome. Then place your stitch markers for the raglan increases. Great, got it done. Started knitting, and you know, I was seeing the eyelet detail start coming along. I'm like, oh, I like this. This is really cool. This is really pretty. And then it was time for bed. So I'm like, okay, go to bed. Good start for the night. Got up the next morning. I was so excited Saturday morning to continue working on my Felix pullover. So I started knitting a little bit, and I was looking at it. I'm like, I'm following the pattern. I can read the pattern. Trust what the pattern is saying. But as I'm looking at this, you know, your raglan detail, you have, you know, your front. So front detail, back detail where you increase. So one here, one here, one here, one here. Well, when I was awake enough to realize this on Saturday morning, it turns out I had 3 on one side and 1 on the other side. So that was not good. So I was not entirely sure how that happened, that I had the 3 raglan, you know, the increases on one side of the sweater and one lone one by itself. And I'm just looking at this and like, that is not right. So I ripped out the sweater back to the ribbing, of the neckline. So that's before you do any of the raglan. And it turns out, as I'm reading the pattern again, I just placed my markers in the wrong place. So, you know, the pattern instructs you to put your markers in certain places for those raglan increases. And so I just have these little stitch markers that notate where they're going to go. Well, I had misread it, being too tired, I guess, on a Friday night, and I had put them in the wrong place. So in the grand scheme of things, the sweater was not too far along. So I was able to correct it, and now we are on track. You know, raglan detail here, and on this side and this side. So we are all good. I was a little frustrated just because I had put that knitting time into it already. So you kind of feel like that's lost knitting time, but you're still knitting, so it's time well spent. But having said all of that, I am very, very happy with how this is knitting up. I love how the yarn feels. You know, being a bulky weight yarn, this actually feels fairly light. And I really do love the raglan details on this. So I think this is going to be really fun. So I hope to put some more work into this sweater this week, hopefully without making too many mistakes. All right, the last thing I want to show you is crochet. And I did show this last week. This is my crochet granny stripe blanket. And crazily enough, it is living in this bag, which says I'd rather be knitting. And that is not meant as a diss on crochet, I promise. I love crocheting too. It's just this bag was a gift from my son a couple of Christmases ago. And the granny stripe blanket is pretty large, so it needed a larger house. So this was the bag that it is put in. So last week I showed off the granny stripe blanket. This is a pattern by Attic 24, Lucy of Attic 24, called Granny Stripes. This is made using fingering weight yarn. I have not made a whole lot of progress, but maybe an inch or a little over where that stitch marker is where I was last week. And so I am making I am crocheting this using magic knot balls. So I am putting fingering weight yarns together into a ball. And I thought it would be fun to show the size of my magic knot ball. So this actually probably took me a good, I'd say probably 3 hours to wind up, because I had little tiny minis that needed to be, you know, they were in skein form. So, you know, you have to undo those and then adding these. This probably is 30 minis maybe, and scraps, you know, here and there from old projects. I put this on my scale because I wanted to weigh this, and it turned out to be 283 grams. So that's nearly the equivalent of 3 full skeins of fingering weight yarn. So there's a lot of yarn in here. So now that I have this, I should be well set to go. But I first had to put that time in making this magic knot ball. And I did share last week that there are a number of tutorials on YouTube. The tutorial I used to make this magic knot ball is by the Crazy Sock Lady, who has a really good tutorial showing how you do that. So this is pretty fun. This is a lot of yarn, so I'm excited to crochet this up and continue into working on my crochet granny stripe blanket. I would just like to say thank you for all of you who have been joining me each week and commenting and subscribing. It has been great. If you would like to follow me on Instagram, I am CB Crafty Girl, and I'm also CB Crafty Girl on Ravelry. I would love it if you'd like and subscribe to this channel and comment down below. Because I shared, you know, my my sweater woe today about my crazy raglan 3 on one side. Share with me if you've had any crafting horror stories, knitting, crafting of any kind, or just share what you're working on right now. I would love to hear from you. This has just been so much fun hearing from different people and people that I know already reaching out to me. From starting this channel, I learned from my Aunt Maureen, that's on my dad's side, that she crochets a little and she sews a little bit. And I had asked her if my grandma sewed, that's my dad's mom, or if she did any kind of crafty work. And it turns out that my grandma Zinder did crochet. She crocheted doilies and she did sew. And I did not know that. So that was really exciting to learn. Also, my mom, hi Mom, if you're watching, my mom talked about Red Heart yarn. I had mentioned that big Christmas clown sock was made out of a Red Heart yarn. And that brought up a memory for her that her dad used to sell Red Heart yarn in his dime store. So that was really fun to hear too. So I will stop for now. I hope that you are all well, and I hope that you enjoy this next week. Enjoy your knitting, crocheting, any crafting time that you have, and I'll be back next week with a new episode. Take care. Bye-bye.